This is the story of one of the least known mysteries in American military aviation. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what we do and don't know about the fate of the flying boxcar 512680, the supernatural speculation, and its very unusual memorial. How it began. June 5th, 1965. Homestead Air Force Base, Florida. It's just after 7:30 in the evening. A Fairchild C-119G flying boxcar, tail number 512680, sits on the tarmac, engines turning over. 10 people are climbing aboard, a crew of 5 and 5 additional passengers. Contemporary reporting indicates 4 of those passengers were reservists, traveling in civilian status, while the 5th was an airman first class catching a ride toward Ramey Air Force Base in Puerto Rico. Their destination is less than 3 hours away, Grand Turk Island, at the southeastern tip of the Bahamas. The mission. The plane belonged to the 440th Troop Carrier Wing, an Air Force Reserve unit. This wasn't a combat sortie or a classified run. It was maintenance logistics, about as unglamorous as military aviation gets. Another C-119 was grounded at Grand Turk with engine trouble. Flight 512680 was carrying maintenance personnel and equipment, including an aircraft engine, to help get it flying again. The aircraft arrived at Homestead in the afternoon of June 5th to prep for the leg south. It departed at 7:47 that evening. It would be a short flight over open water, a job they'd probably done a dozen times before. The silence. Here's where the record goes quiet and stays quiet. The flying boxcar never reported in at Grand Turk. There was no distress call and no reported engine trouble. The aircraft's last radio communication was apparently routine, made while it was in the vicinity of Crooked Island. Contemporary reports later placed final contact only about 95 miles from Grand Turk. They had covered most of the journey. Whatever happened appears to have happened during the final portion of the flight. Compare that to other well-known aviation disappearances, and the lack of information here is almost eerie. Amelia Earhart's final radio transmissions are famous precisely because they exist. Fragments researchers have picked apart for 90 years. The 2014 Malaysian flight MH370 at least pinged satellites for hours after it went dark. 512680 gave investigators nothing. No mayday, no major wreckage, just an aircraft that took off from Florida and stopped existing somewhere over the water before it reached the Turks and Caicos. Official summaries describe the aircraft as having disappeared during flight rather than identifying a confirmed crash location. The search and rescue crews were sent out to comb the corridor between Florida and the southern Bahamas. This wasn't a case that got quietly written off. A lost military transport with 10 men aboard triggered a real response, and the result of the initial search of vast stretches of open ocean was no debris field, no oil slick, and no survivors. On July 18th, about 6 weeks after the main search, debris was found on a beach near Acklands Island. Among the objects were an aircraft component consistent with equipment used on a C-119, and part of a broken plywood equipment box. Air Force officials considered a connection to the missing aircraft possible, but the debris wasn't enough to establish a wreck site or determine what had happened. To this day, the aircraft has never been located. No additional debris, no sonar contact identified as the wreck. Officially, 512680 remains missing because no wreck site has ever been found. Why this one feeds the legend. Here's the part that turns a sad accident into a decades-long mystery. Geography. Grand Turk sits near the southeastern edge of the loosely defined region already being called the Bermuda Triangle. The name had been coined only a year before in a 1964 Argosy article by writer Vincent Gaddis. But the legend wouldn't explode into popular culture until the following decade, particularly after Charles Berlitz's best-selling 1974 book, The Bermuda Triangle. But cases exactly like this one, military aircraft, experienced crews, routine flights, zero wreckage, are precisely what built that mythology in the first place. Flight 19 in 1945, and Star Tiger in 1948, and tacked onto that grim list, a flying boxcar carrying those 10 mechanics and airmen on what should have been an unremarkable Saturday evening hop to fix an engine. None of this requires anything supernatural to be tragic. A C-119 is not a fast, high-flying jet. It's a twin-engine, propeller-driven transport, cruising relatively low compared with jet transports. Any serious mechanical failure, onboard fire, loss of control, or severe weather encounter over open water could have produced a catastrophe from which little recoverable evidence remained. Any of those explanations is more likely than anything paranormal. But more likely isn't the same as confirmed. And that gap between plausible and proven is exactly why this case, more than 6 decades later, is still officially unsolved. The memorial that isn't the plane. And this is where the story gets its final, strange twist. Today, if you visit Niagara Falls Air Reserve Station in New York, a base with its own long history of Air Force Reserve C-119 operations, you'll find a flying boxcar on static display painted with the lost aircraft's tail number. Obviously, it isn't the real aircraft. The real one is still out there, somewhere, unrecovered. This display aircraft has its own separate history. Originally built for the Royal Canadian Air Force, flown for years north of the border, later converted for civilian firefighting work in the American West, before eventually being restored and repainted to honor the lost crew. A plane that survived a completely different career, wearing the identity of one that never came home. It stands there now, as a striking physical memorial to the aircraft and men who disappeared. Out of all the aircraft that have vanished in that stretch of ocean, 512680 might be the most quietly documented and least discussed. There's no blockbuster theory attached to it, no viral debate, just a flight plan, a departure time, an empty arrival slot at Grand Turk, and decades of silence. If somewhere along that short stretch of water between Florida and the Turks and Caicos, the aircraft is still resting on the ocean floor, it may still hold the answer to what happened. And the wait for its discovery continues.